Thanks very much, Liesl. I guess I have to stand here, right? You guys are recording this and you need the microphone and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So thanks very much. I mean, that's very kind, and it's like, as probably some of you have heard, you know, if your mom was here, she'd be shaking her head at, oh yeah, that's all good. And if your dad was here, it's like, who is that guy? Because that's not who I know. So anyway, so thanks very much. So what I'd like to do is, I know this is like sustainability. That's kind of your guys' thing, right? So really, I'm going to talk about climate risk in a security sense. But if you think of it, this is really how do we sustain the nation's ability to conduct our armed forces, to have an effective military, so that when the country needs our military to do our nation's business, it's ready. It's really sustainability, although in ways that, frankly, might make this group uncomfortable, and if I put that in the Pentagon, it would probably make them uncomfortable too. But it is sustainability. It's how do we sustain today's capabilities, right? How do we sustain our quality of life? How do we sustain all of this in the face of some stressors that we frankly have not seen in human civilization? That's really what we're going to talk about. I mean, and if you remember that and want to go play with your phone now, actually that's okay. But that's what we're going to talk about. Okay, so. Let me see what is actually, oh, okay, so these, okay, there we go. Yeah, just, Liesl already mentioned, I probably, since these guys pay my salary, I should at least put one slide up for them. So yeah, I'm at Penn State now. I actually did my undergrad here way back when. And now I'm part of the faculty. So Liesl mentioned all these weird titles. I think it was, you know, it's part of the government in which, you know, if you have a big word, always use that, even if a small one will do. So we did that. The other thing is right now I'm a professor of practice. Anybody know what that is? It's a perfect job, you see? Nobody knows what it is. So who's early career here? Anybody? Okay, a couple early careers. If you can ever get a job and a title where your boss has really no idea what it is, take it. Okay? It's really good. All right. Okay, so let's keep on. So we're just going to do some basics. If anybody came here thinking I was going to talk science for an hour, you will be sorely disappointed. I'm going to go through just a tiny little bit, but really just so that people as non-climate scientists can kind of get an understanding, I hope, as to why the climate science community is so convinced that we are changing the climate. We know why. It's people. It's us. And I'm just going to go through that a tiny little bit. But when somebody really wants to get into the science with me, I mean, I can tell in about 30 seconds, is this legitimately somebody who really does have questions for science? In which case, that's fine, and I'll try to explain it in something that kind of resembles English. But usually, it's not. Usually, it's somebody who really just doesn't want to deal with the issue, and they come up with all these sort of, you know, faux things. And eventually it's like, okay, I used to try to humor them and it's like, now stop. Okay, just stop. Because it's like, you're not Einstein, you're not Galileo, you're not Newton, you're some dude, it's always a dude, who's living in your mom's basement. And they're usually living in their mom's basement. So what is it that makes you so scared to talk about this issue? Let's just cut the you-know-what and not have this false debate about science because, you know, you watched Fox News last night. And let's actually find out what it is. And it's almost some kind, you guys all know it. It's some combination of the following three issues. I don't want the government to tell me any more what to do. I'm afraid that if we take action, my job goes somewhere overseas or just goes away entirely. Or I'm going to spend too much money and I can't put gas in my pickup truck or my ATVs or whatever. It's like it's going to cost me, it may cost my job, or I just don't want to be told what to do. It's like, okay, well let's at least get that out on the table and now let's talk about policies. And that's fine. But I just get people off of the false science thing. And, you know, and the trouble is with scientists, we love to talk about science. So, you know, with the analogy I use sometimes, who owns a dog? Or has owned a dog? Okay, most of us have. You know, you get those stick things with the, you know, the leverage and you can throw the ball. that's sometimes what people who don't really want to deal with this issue, that's what it is. It's like, climate's always changed, and you throw that ball out there and the scientists go, run it down. Oh no, yeah, well here, let me show you all the ways it's changed and stuff like that. Okay, fine. Oh, CO2, it's a trace gas. It's like, oh, let me talk to you about it. And I mean, so how much, if you've ever had a dog, if you're the one throwing that, that's not a whole lot of effort. The dog gets tired. And it takes time. Perfect, right? You're never talking about the issue. Okay, so that's anyways, is how this stuff works. So let me tell you in my very simple mind what climate risk is about. So the first thing you should know about me is I can only remember 3 things at one time. If I start getting a list of 5, 6, 7, my eyes start glazing over, it's hard to remember. But I can, somehow our brains, I think, are sort of collectively wired that for whatever reason, we can kind of do 3 things. So I talk about climate risk is 3 things: people, water, and change. Those are really the 3 words that I use to describe this. So when I say people, and yes, this is making a little fun of the polar bears, but it's about people and not the polar bears per se. Yes, the polar bears have issues, I understand that, but it is really hard to get people fundamentally engaged on that. It's kind of funny that we're in this room, because the last time I was in this room, I was a guest of my graduate student. And she was a member, she's graduated now, but she was a member of Penn State's LBGTQA, I think I got that right, LBGTQA association. And she asked me to come and speak. So I did a little bit, but I really wanted to listen. And I talked to some of the gay rights folks in there, and they said, how did they change the conversation? And what they said is they finally found, and it had taken many, many years, it's not like it changed overnight, but many, many years of work. And they found a message that was personal, relatable, and emotional. And if you think about polar bears in a climate context, run it through that prism of personal, relatable, and emotional. Emotional for some, for a few, the people who donate to World Wildlife Fund and stuff like that. Personal, how many people have encountered a polar bear not in a zoo? Relatable, same thing, right? And that's pretty much the response I usually get. I have found one. It was on a runway in very northern Canada in November. That was fun, at night. Well, it was actually 1 in the morning, but it was still dark, or in the afternoon, it was still dark. But most people don't. So, but people, we kind of understand them. And I tell people that the climate is going to affect you and me, and our sons and our daughters, and our moms and our dads, and our aunts and our nephews, and our uncles and nieces, our friends, in our towns, in our communities, in our universities, in our cities, in our state, and even in our country. It is either going to be direct or indirect, because even in places where we may not directly be flooded out by sea level rise, when you start getting hundreds of billions of dollars all at one time on sea level, who do you think is going to pay for that? Who do you think is paying for the 3 hurricanes this past year? Us. Okay? Uncle Sam, one way or the other, is going to put his hand into your pocket, and that's how we're going to pay. So we are all paying. I sometimes call that the carbon tax we never voted for. I wrote an article. But that's what I mean. This is fundamentally a people issue. Okay? It's about us. It's about water. You can certainly use different integrating principles. I would never stand here and say it's only about water. You can make a pretty good argument for heat or some other things. But water does capture a lot of things that's going on. I talk about water is too much, too little, wrong place, wrong time. It's salty now where it used to be fresh, wet where it's dry, liquid where it was solid. It captures sea level rise, it captures the melting ice. Even the chemistry of the oceans themselves are changing because of the absorbing of the CO2. Why do we care about 2 billion, rough plus or minus people, get their protein from the ocean? And if we screw up the food webs, that's another 2 billion people that are looking for food. The water really captures a whole lot of stuff. What kills people in hurricanes? It's water, it's not the wind. What kills people in inland flooding? It's the water. Droughts, if you have nothing, you can't grow food. And food in many ways is water being moved around in another form. So water is really, really crucial. And as we change the climate, we are fundamentally changing that distribution, that magnitude, that intensity, and of course the sea level. We're changing that as well. So people, water, and then I talk about the change. And if there's anything that scares me about climate change, it's not the climate. So we're in Pennsylvania. This is a Pennsylvania conference. Who thinks that Pennsylvania has ideal climate? exactly. Oh, one person does. Okay, one does. Okay, I tell people that unless you live in Honolulu or San Diego, I'm not sure you have an ideal climate. Those guys do. It's pretty close. But what we have had, I mean, you know, here at Penn State, I mean, normally we don't see the sun between about November and March. This year we can't make it stop snowing. You know, we're 2.5 weeks from graduation. It's probably going to snow here again next week, too. Early next week, for joy. But what we have had, and everybody's had, is a stable climate. Within bounds. You know, there's of course year to year and seasonal variability. But we've kind of known what grows, what doesn't. We've known pretty much if you build a town at the sea level that it's going to stay at the sea level. And we've been able to do this for thousands of years. And in fact, this is really where we have built human civilization on this premise, implicit premise of climate stability. I mean, I don't think the Egyptians, you know, convened a conference 8,000 years ago and said, okay, we can build civilization now because the climate stabilized. They probably had whatever stone power plants looked like. But we have done that. You know, we've been able to have agriculture and then, of course, villages and towns, and we stopped being hunter-gatherers. And the next thing you know, we all have one of these things in our pocket. So we have built civilization on that. So now with, what is it, 7+ billion people, we're going to go and figure out how we're going to live as a human civilization in a changing climate. And we have not done this in a modern civilization. So that's going to be the experiment there. So people, water, change. That to me is what climate change is about. Okay, I mentioned the science thing, and I'm just going to go through this pretty quickly. This is my very simple three-legged stool, and the three legs are the basic theories. Do we see evidence in the observations? And can we predict it? At least if you're in like the weather business, really if you take all my bio stuff and strip out the words, what it really says is I'm a recovering weather forecaster. So I'm kind of into the prediction business. That's what I've done for, oh God, almost 50 years now. That's a scary thought. And if you can do all of those three things, I would argue that you have some level of understanding. So spoiler alert, in climate science, we kind of go yes, yes, and yes, and that's why we think we have understanding. So if you just sort of remember that at a conceptual level, if you're not a physical scientist, when somebody starts like poking about this stuff, we can do this. And we have done some of this stuff actually for about 150 years. So who is in the science community here? Okay, fair number? A few. Okay, yeah, a few. So how do you get institutes named for you for the next 500 years and buildings and prizes and things like that? By overturning the wisdom, and then people after you show, oh my God, she was right. You know, that's how you become famous. So it's not like other people have like not tried to turn this stuff over once we figured it out. But every time we look at it, we just simply confirm what we started to learn, even back in the early 1800s. So this is why the climate community, you know, you hear the term 97%. The vast majority of climate scientists are very convinced that both the climate is changing, and it's because of us, because of what we're doing. Okay, so yeah, that was that part. So, okay, so here's the theory part. No, I am giving a midterm next week, but I'm not going to give it to you. I'm not going to make you derive this. But when I started doing this stuff in the Pentagon, some of my fellow admirals asked me, my God, Titley, did you get religion? And I said, well, I just went to the Church of the Radiative Transfer Equation. Because it's just really basic physics. And not only is it physics, but as I kind of mentioned, this is cutting-edge 19th century science here. The guy on the left is a Frenchman, Fourier. If anybody took calculus, yes, it's the same Fourier there. He actually figured out that the atmosphere made a difference in what our temperatures were. The guy in the middle is a Scot, Tyndall, and he was the one. He was in London in like the late 1800s, and they had these wonderful, like Victorian, makes sense, right, 1880s, pieces of lab equipment, and he would do these public demonstrations. They were sort of like the TED Talks of the 19th century in London, and he would put oxygen into this apparatus and no change in temperature, nitrogen, you know, which is most of our atmosphere, no change. And they put CO2, big change. He was the guy who figured out that CO2 really mattered. And then finally you get to the guy on the right there, a Swede, Arrhenius, and he actually said, hey, this industrial revolution thing's going on. And he started to do some calculations. He did some of the first calculations of greenhouse warming. He underestimated how much gas we put in, but the basic idea of how he did it was pretty good. So you had a Frenchman, a Scot, and a Swede. As far as I know, they did not go into a bar. But they, by the time we got to the 20th century, roughly 1900, we had a pretty good understanding of the physics. And all we have done since then is basically confirm it. So we really do understand what's going on at a very fundamental level. More CO2, warmer. And the Keeling curve shows we're putting in more CO2, and when you look at those CO2 molecules, you'll see they're really, really old. Where do they come from? From the oil, and from the coal, and from the gas. It's pretty simple. Okay, observations. You know, we could do a whole week-long seminar on all the different kinds of observations. I'm just going to show you one, though. So this is NASA. I'll run it a couple times. So what you're seeing here, can I move? Okay, I'm going to move anyways, but you can tell me to. So here's the year. So what my friends at NASA did is they took basically all the thermometer data of the 20th century and they averaged it out for each station. And each station, of course, would have an average. And then for a given year, and these years here are coming right here, they would color it up. And if it was colder than average, it would be some kind of blue. And if it was warmer than average, it would be some kind of red or orange. And then they just made an animation. And this is what you see. So I'm going to run it one more time. So what you can do, like when you're watching this, you can, I mean, this thing to me is really cool, but I'm a science guy. And you know, you could watch maybe where you grew up, maybe where your parents or grandparents or great-grandparents grew up in another part of the world. When I run it again, watch the Dust Bowl, because we think of the Dust Bowl as really, really hot years, right, in the 1930s. And they were pretty warm in the US, but if you kind of watch it, you'll see, there we go, you'll see that maybe not so warm in the rest of the world, whereas now, as we end it, you kind of see where they are. So here's a date, you know, coming up into World War I, in probably the 20s, yeah, 1920s. So here come the Dust Bowl, 29, here's the Dust Bowl. See that kind of orange blob over the US, but a lot of blue on the rest of the world. So 40s, 50s, 60s, who can remember the 60s? You weren't there, okay. 70s, 80s, 90s, make it through Y2K, that was fun. And because I'm not very good at graphics, I had somebody else do this for me, and that's why it ends at 2012. If I had the later ones, they're even redder than this, because we've had even warmer years on average since this. So again, you know, we could look at all kinds of observations, and I could go through a whole spiel of, okay, if you think, oh, these are the governments and they've been doing something to them. If I ran, you know, Berkeley's, which is private, who actually didn't think the government was doing this right, you'd see the exact same thing. Excuse me. The Europeans, the Japanese, it's like, okay, I don't believe any temperature, air temperature data. Look at the ocean temperatures. Look at the ice retreating. Look at the ecosystems, how the critters are coming north earlier and up at higher elevations. Just very simply here, when I was an undergraduate, my birthday's in mid-October. In mid-October, the leaves in central Pennsylvania were pretty much in peak color. Now, when I'm back here teaching and I look out of my office, I gotta wait till the end of October. And I've seen that every year. I mean, that's just change in 30 years here. So there's tons and tons and tons of observations to show us our climate is changing. And finally, we can predict this stuff. This, if it looks like a PDF of a Xerox of a PDF of a Xerox, it's because it is. Comes out of a science magazine appropriately called Science. You can go to the library here, or any library, and find it. It was published in, I think it was 1980 by a guy named Jim Hansen. Not the Muppets guy, but the climate guy. And he published basically the black lines. So, you know, he had to start assuming after 2000, it's like, are we going to cut down or not cut down on CO2? That's why he's got a bunch of different black lines. And then somebody, you know, 35 years later had the brilliant idea of let's saying, it's like, hey, how'd that Hansen guy do? Let's go find out. And that's the magenta line. And you can see, is it perfect? No. But was it useful? Yeah, I would say so. It said, we're about to get on an escalator and go on up. And that's sure enough what has happened. So again, we can understand this stuff, we can predict it, and we can observe it as well. So that's all I'm going to do on science. If anybody's got any questions on it, I'm happy to talk about it, but otherwise we're gonna move on. Okay, so as a security risk, remember I said I can only do 3 things. This is one way if I've got to like talk to a reporter or talk to somebody very senior in the Pentagon or a 4-star officer, and they say, okay, Titley, why should I pay attention to this? It changes the operating environment. And that means like where our soldiers, sailors, airmen, or Marines go, we want to make sure that they have everything they need in both terms of training and in terms of equipment to be, the most effective. If you're in the United States military, there are no points for second place. We tend to fight the away game, and we want a home field advantage. So we want to know about where we're going, and we want to frankly be better than the adversary. So if that physical environment is changing, we better be ready for it. Because if we're not, we're probably going to come in second, and that's a bad place to be. The infrastructure, that's a fancy way of saying bases and training ranges. The obvious places for that are like Norfolk. Norfolk, Virginia is kind of a hot spot on sea level rise. I'm sure many of you know that on the Mid-Atlantic coast. If you look at global sea level rise, the slowing of the Gulf Stream, there was a bunch of stuff actually just this week on more published on that. And the fact that for non-climate reasons, Norfolk in that area is actually sinking with subsidence. They probably are lining themselves up for somewhere between 4 and 6 feet of effective sea level rise in a century. Now, to compare that, the 20th century was about 8 inches. So 6 feet, 8 inches. So when they say, oh yeah, we're dealing with sea level rise, it's like, no, you're not. And this gets hard to imagine, and this is one of the things that makes it really hard, right? In climate change, I call it the failure of imagination, kind of what we suffered in 9/11. We kind of knew intellectually people could do this, but we never really think it would happen. And that's in many ways, I think, where we are with climate risk. Yeah, I heard about it somewhere, some guy talked to me, something, oh my God, it's really happening. So it's not just the sea level rise, although that's a big part. We need to deal with flooding, with drought, just with extreme heat. Extreme heat plus drought on these big training ranges, when you use live ammunition, you tend to set them on fire, and that tends to upset the neighbors. So the DoD, the Department of Defense, tries not to do that too many times. So there's lots of different issues, but the infrastructure allows the United States to get our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines trained up to go overseas, to do the nation's bidding, and if our infrastructure can't support that, then we have an issue in the military. And then the making bad situations worse. This is sort of like you've probably heard of Syria, Arab Spring. Climate is one of the stressors. It's one of many stressors, some of which are climate related, others have nothing to do with climate. But when they all line up, they can take a bad situation, usually it's a place with already poor governance, already existing tensions, be it ethnic, economic, demographic, whatever, and it can, tilt it over into something very bad and occasionally catastrophic, as we're seeing in Syria. So those are my 3 things: operating environment, threats to infrastructure or impacts to infrastructure, and it can make bad places worse. Another way to really look at, I would say, almost the same thing. This is a slide I gave to 70 heads of navies a couple of years ago. Basically, I was asked by the then head of the United States Navy to come up to Newport, Rhode Island, and talk to pretty much the head of every Navy that talks to the United States. And we did a half day on climate risks to maritime security. And this is a slide I put up. And you probably see this a lot in your fields, is whenever you have a chance, you kind of speak in their language, or you speak in your boss's language, or your client's language, maybe not yours. What do I mean by that? I mean, the word climate only shows up in the title slide here. Capacity, readiness, new missions all have very specific meanings to senior military professionals, regardless of what country they're from. And then I tried to put kind of in English, if you will, plain English, sort of the places that we saw this happening. So the Arctic is probably arguably the biggest change that we see happening right now in the physical environment. Bases of disaster relief are all pretty much self-explanatory, and the security threats is what I just talked about. So it's really just different ways of kind of showing the same thing, you know, and I tell my students, it's like, how do you take all this really complex, multidimensional stuff, and can you crunch it down so that you can capture the attention of a senior person quickly without like bastardizing the science of the message? And you know, so there's a little balance. Okay, I'm just going to go through sort of the things on the rows really quickly, and then we'll get to some final comments. So we'll start with the Arctic here. And I'm sure just about everybody here knows that the Arctic is arguably the physical ecosystem or environment that has changed faster than any place else in the world in the last 20, 30 years or so. So the picture on the left here is how much ice was in the Arctic. I think it's in March of 1990, so pretty much at the maximum of the ice. And if you can see, hopefully it shows up with the lighting in here, it's not too bad. There's a bunch of dark blue, and that is ice, but that's thin ice. All that white on the left, that's the really hard, old, multi-year ice that used to comprise, you know, 50, 60% of the ice in the Arctic. Stayed around for a long time, very hard, very stable, supported a lot of things, and you know, kind of defined the Arctic for what it was. Fast forward to 2016, again, this is an observation, not a projection, but just same analysis, same algorithms to process the data there. And what you see is, yes, there's a lot of dark blue, there's almost no white. So if you just kind of casually looked at the Arctic from space or from, you know, 100,000 feet, yeah, hey, it's all ice covered. Yes, it is. It's all really thin. And really thin ice is at great risk to get broken up. Basically, it takes a couple storms. This is why it's so hard to look at, even now, we've set yet another, well, it's the second lowest. It wasn't, last year was the lowest ever in March. This year's the second lowest. But are we going to set a new record low in September? And the answer is we don't know. And why is that? Because frankly, it depends on how many big storms we get this summer. Big storms, you know, stir up the water, break it up, you end up with a whole bunch of little ice cubes that melt out quite fast. No big storms, it'll still be really low, but we won't get a record. A couple big storms and some sun, it's gone. Okay, tons and tons of impacts to security. Again, we can do all week. I do about 5 lectures of this in my climate class. We are not going to do 5 lectures today. This slide here on trade routes. The US is not really paying attention to this, surprise, I know. But if you look, the one on the left, that blue line, is the Northwest Passage. I hope you can see that. And the Northwest Passage to me is a little bit like Route 66. It's mythical, everybody loves to talk about it, you write movies about it and books and all this sort of thing. But you know, how much of American commerce moves on Route 66 today? Well, it doesn't, because we don't actually have it anymore. You know, we use Interstate 40 and stuff like that. So the Northwest Passage, yes, it is opening. It's going to be about the last place it opens because of the way the ice is. And it turns out if you're driving big ships, there's some pretty challenging navigation components. There's a couple places that are really shallow, and a couple places it's really easy to hit rocks and stuff like that. And in general, when you're driving ships, and I did it for 10 years, it's bad to hit things. You don't want to do that. The line on the right, the red line on the far right, that's what's called the Northern Sea Route. This is the one the Russians are really pushing. They think it runs through their internal waters. If we had a bunch of lawyers here, we could argue the US says, no, it's not internal waters, whatever. The Russians have, this is one of the reasons they have all their icebreakers. They have a huge coastline. They have 50% of the coastline of the Arctic. They need icebreakers. And they monetize them by charging a whole chunk of rubles to anybody who uses that red line. If you're going to use icebreakers, you pay the Russians and you pay them a lot of money. Did anybody hear about, just this past February, so just a couple months ago, there was what they call a liquid natural gas tanker, an LNG tanker, went from Norway to China along that red route in February. Last I checked, that was winter in the Arctic, and they did it with no icebreakers. That to me is like, whoa, that's pretty, that's a change. That's a really big change. How many people in the United States took notice? About 3. But that's a big change, and we're going to have to pay attention to that. The route I think is going to come in is the green one, sort of this over the pole, deep water, international waters, nobody controls it, it's just like the high seas. And whenever I go talk to my Chinese friends, that's what they're watching. And it's probably going to open up in about, I would say, 15 or 20 years. Not this year, not next year, but it's coming. So all of you early career people, that route is going to happen in your careers. Pretty sure. Okay, there's a whole bunch of other security parts. You know, Russia is certainly militarizing the Northern Sea Route. I mean, they're putting, these are surface-to-air missile batteries on here. They say, oh, search and rescue base. So I'm wondering, I ask them sometimes, are you trying to create business for your own search and rescue if you have anti-air missiles for the 150 nautical mile radius? If you talk to the Russians, anyone work with Russia, go to Russia, deal with the Russians? Somebody? Nobody? Nobody in here. Okay. Kind of a zero-sum paranoia kind of culture there. I win, you lose, and that's it. There is no win-win in Russia. It's like, I win, you lose. So one of the things Russia has had for the last 1,000 years is ice along that northern boundary, that boundary on the right. And Russia is always just paranoid about being invaded. So the ice is gone, and they really think, at least that's what they tell me, that the West is going to come across the Arctic into Mother Russia. I tell them the West can't find the Arctic, so I wouldn't worry about it. But they don't listen to it. But honestly, I'm not overly concerned with what I've seen the Russians doing, but you need to watch them. The Russians do tend to act more like a normal nation in the Arctic than in other places. It's in their interest, and that's why they do it. But it's something the US should pay more attention to. The other one that's really interesting is Greenland. I don't know if you've watched, there's been actually a couple things in the news. Greenland really wants to be independent. They're a Danish territory, you probably all know that. The Danes basically subsidize Greenland to about $3 billion a year. The Danes would like to stop doing that. So at one point, 4 or 5 years ago, when oil was really high, it's like, hey, we're going to make it on oil. Well, that's not working out so well. So now they're looking at things like uranium and rare earth minerals and stuff like that. Who's paying attention? Pop quiz, no, it's not the US. When I talk to the State Department, it's like, oh, Greenland, yeah, they love us, they'll be with us. It's like, really? Are you sure? Have you talked to them? The people who are paying attention is China. Lots of trade delegations, they sent their icebreaker across the Arctic to go visit Greenland and Iceland, all kinds of trade deals. Iceland as well, China tried to buy for a golf course. I mean, of course, the first thing you would think about if you live in China is going to Iceland to play golf. Happened to be on the biggest natural port in Iceland, but I'm sure that was just a coincidence. I mean, China is very frankly looking for an Atlantic terminus for this over-the-pole route. That's what they want. And then they're going to connect into the existing shipping lanes. This is basically the shortcut, right? The shortcut to Grandma's house. And this is what they're looking at. So the Chinese are paying attention to this. So I mean, I've tried for now about 9 years to convince the United States that it's in our strategic interest to pay attention to the Arctic. I have been utterly and objectively failing at that. So now it's like, fine. Since great power politics is in vogue again, if you read the National Defense Strategy, National Security Strategy, again, without saying whether that's right or wrong, that's what's in vogue. So it's like, well, hey, guess what? Your great power buddies, your rivals here, they're sure paying attention. Do you want to be ignoring it? So that's what I tell my friends in the Pentagon and in Washington. Okay, infrastructure. I'll just go through one thing. It's easy to talk about a whole bunch of places. This is an island called Kwajalein, middle of the Pacific, right on the date line, near the equator. And my friends in the United States Air Force are building what they call a space fence. This is basically a whole bunch of stuff, including big radars, to look up into space and track every single object that's up there. Great, we need them to do it. Can't think of a better service in the Air Force to do it. Wonderful, spend your money. $1 billion radars, roughly. So they're going to put one on Kwaj. Great. So they do a 250-page environmental impact study, and they look at everything except sea level rise. So the Associated Press gets a hold of this and basically mocks them. And the Air Force points to the contractor, who points to the requirements, who points to the, everybody points to somebody else. It's nobody's fault. But the fact is this was a 50-year design life that's probably, if we're lucky, going to last 20. Guess who pays? Everybody in this room. Who pays taxes? So, you know, this is like, come on guys, the stupid shall be punished. Please don't be stupid. And this is, again, it's not a political thing or whatever. You need to think about this stuff. It's that change piece of climate change. Okay, let me just show you an example domestically. So this is Hampton Roads. This is Norfolk, Virginia, world's largest naval base. And what I'm going to show you is sort of where we think sea level will probably stabilize for these various temperature degrees. And this is going to take a while. And it's a big scientific question as to how long this is going to take. It's not today. It's not this decade. It's probably, you know, the seas are still going to be rising after 2100. But eventually the ice sheets stabilize at a warmer temperature, and where are they? So where's Norfolk Naval Base? See that yellow circle? Hopefully. That's where the base is. So there's 1 degree. Well, oh, by the way, we're basically at 1 degree today. Yeah, looks like it's still there. That's good. There's 2 degrees. You know, hey, maybe Paris, right? We'd like to be to 2. We don't know that we're going to make it. And here's 4. So when I talk to the Navy and they say, oh, we raised the piers by like a foot or 2, I say, hey, that's really cool, guys. Oh, by the way, you probably want to be thinking about Yorktown for your base, not Norfolk, because there will be no Norfolk, there will be no Virginia Beach, there will be no Chesapeake, there will be no Suffolk. There's going to be a lot of water out there, and that's where we're going. So, you know, it's kind of fun to write a piece of animation too. Whoops. You know, and that's 1 degree, and that's where we go. So these are the kind of things, frankly, the Department of Defense is really not thinking in these terms. They just, and nobody is that I can. Okay, humanitarian assistance, we do this well. We do this really well. The only issue is if you start doing this a whole lot, you're now not doing something else that you were probably paid to do. And, oh, by the way, having the U.S. military doing humanitarian assistance, there may be a more expensive way to do that on God's green earth, but I can't think of it. You know, a carrier has an operating cost, a U.S. aircraft carrier has an operating cost of $20 to $25 million a day. That buys a lot of water bottles. Okay, and again, sometimes, hey, if we're there and we can do it, I mean, it's, you know, we've got tremendous suffering. The U.S. is very good at doing this. We have logistics and intelligence and surveillance and all this stuff, and we can do it really well. Maybe there's cheaper ways. Maybe we need a constabulary force. Maybe we need a force dedicated to this. It would be much cheaper than what we do it today. So we got to think about that, and we really haven't. Let me just talk about these geostrategic risks, and this is the last piece of this. I mentioned that you know, when you make bad things worse, it's like if anybody's had to do like a plane accident investigation or a mishap in your business or job or whatever, what you kind of see is it's almost never, well, Bob screwed up and the plane crashed. It's almost never that simple or easy. It's like A and B and C and D, and it's like the weather was a little bad, and there was one radar that wasn't working, and the guy was tired, and it all lined up, and then bad things happened. And that's kind of what happened to Syria. So I mean, you really got to go back to the 1970s when Assad took power. And one of the things he decided was, we're going to be self-sufficient in wheat and barley. Now you'd like to think his advisors would have said, hey boss, you know, we're in the Eastern Mediterranean here, kind of a desert, maybe not your smartest idea ever. But I think what they said was, hey boss, you are a smart, powerful, and handsome person, and we'll get right on that. No, thank God that would never happen in our country. So that's what they did. And sure enough, by the 1990s, they were self-sufficient in wheat and barley. But they did it by draining their aquifers, lowering their rivers. So it's sort of like when you see your neighbor with the 45-foot RV and the 5 snow machines and a really nice boat and, you know, the ATVs and everything. It's like, how'd Joe do that? Well, don't look at his credit cards and don't look at his bank account. And don't look at the 5th mortgage he took out on his house. So, you know, it's great until it's not, you know, financially, but also for Syria. So what happened? A bunch of things. Well, they had a couple droughts. They didn't really have any backup. But they had non-climate things too, like the Iraq War. Dumped 1 million Iraqi refugees into the cities. Nothing to do with climate. It's Assad. Does he take care of his people? Hell no. You know, he's beaten up on them. He's fomenting the tensions rather than trying to make things better. It's actually making things worse. And then you go to about a decade ago, and you have what was the worst observed drought in Syria and we can do attribution on it, and there's a big climate fingerprint, and the farmers had nothing, just nothing. It's not like, well, the crops were a little worse this year, there was nothing. So you now had about 750,000 Syrians, we call them internally displaced people because they're in the same country, also go into the cities, on top of the 1 million Iraqi refugees. And again, and Assad, all he does is he basically beats up on his people. So now you have this fomenting of extremist groups. You have Al-Qaeda Iraq, you have Al-Qaeda Syria, you have ISIS, and you have a whole ton of desperate, desperate people who have no food, no security, no water. And it's like, if I join your group, I have some basics. And I would argue, who amongst us here, we've never been in that position. So I don't blame the people, but the government sure kind of made this. So this is where climate was one of the factors. I hope that makes sense. It was one of the factors that led to this. Not the factor, but it certainly had a role. And that then leads to, really, where does the migration go? We saw about 1 million refugees coming out of Syria. I would argue 1 million refugees shook the EU, the European Union, to its core a couple of years ago. When you start doing some research on the literature on climate and migration, mostly what you realize is we know nothing, just about nothing. So any academics in here, you want something to work on, this would be good. We can't even figure out how many. Some low estimates are 25 million. That's actually worldwide. We can handle that. 1 billion, that's hard. 200 million is the estimate, but it's like this. So if 1 million Syrian migrants did to the EU, how are we going to deal with these kind of numbers? We haven't thought about it. Okay, some things on what to do. So it's Titley's 7-step program. Step 1, admit you have a problem. And Secretary Mattis, to his credit, in this administration, has done just that. He freely admits that climate is changing. He knows why. It is a risk to security. He talks about that, and he says, I will manage this risk like all the other risks I have to manage in the Department of Defense. Are they doing as much as I would like? No. But did they kill everything? No, they didn't. They actually kept a lot of what had been going on before. Maybe not at the level I would like to see, but they have. To some things that are happening here in things like PERC, there are many different people, many different organizations that are coming from their own communities. I call this aligning the message and the messenger. How do you have credible people talking, or at least people who are credible to a community, talking about this? So if you start at the 12 o'clock position, you have many faith-based groups. I happen to work with Catholic Climate Covenant. I'm going to go talk to a synagogue tomorrow afternoon. The insurance guys, the education, health. Health is huge. Health is not political. Everybody wants to be healthy. The security part down at the 6 o'clock position. Media, what is the film? What is going to capture the public's imagination? We're still trying to figure that out. Honestly, I don't think we've got that yet. And yes, there's my polar bear. I have the polar bear because the environmental community has been active here, and they've been active for decades. And they're an important voice in this. And of course, big business. All of these, from their respective positions, help on this. But, let's not be naive. I don't know if you know either of these gentlemen, Dan Kahan or Daniel Kahneman. Kahneman, I read his book, Thinking Fast and Slow. I don't know if anybody's gone through that or not. If you want to, it's not light reading, I will tell you that. Not for a weather guy, at least. Maybe if you've got a master's in psychology, it's easier. But it will really tell you how the human brain thinks, and almost inadvertently, how the human brain is wired to not deal with really hard, abstract issues like climate change, for a whole variety of reasons. I don't have time to talk about that. Kahan shows that it is not a science deficit. And in fact, if you give people who are already pretty convinced that there is nothing going on, the most scientifically literate of them are the most convinced that nothing is going on. Why? Because we are all really good at cherry-picking the little bits and pieces of things that we like to confirm our previous thoughts and our biases, confirmation bias. So both of those gentlemen show that, yes, I like to show this slide as like, oh, we're just going to get the right messages and messengers and eureka. It's probably going to be tough. Leadership counts. The guy on the right was the head of the Navy when I started Navy's Task Force Climate Change. He's the only reason I started Navy's Task Force Climate Change. A one-star admiral by himself is not going to start something like this. In the military, we have this saying that if your boss is interested, you are fascinated. Roughhead was interested, I became fascinated. The guy on the right was bottom right, Admiral Sam Locklear, commander of all the Pacific commands. He famously said in 2013, when asked what the biggest long-term threat was in the Pacific, China, North Korea, all that stuff, he said climate. That earned him a free one-way ticket to the House of Representatives, where he got to testify. And in his very suave, four-star debonair way, he basically told the House, did I stutter? But he said it very nice. And the guy on the bottom left is Langevin. He's a congressman serving congressman. And basically, his efforts got, this is weird, climate put back into the defense bill this year, just signed by our president. So although we see all the tweets, President Trump has also signed a bill that says climate change is real, it's a real thing for the Pentagon to consider, and they better tell us what you're doing. So, which is actually a really good news story. So what can you do? I mean, and I'm sure you guys think about this, and you probably have way more sophisticated things than I do on this. But I have my llamas, which I'm told might be alpacas. I'm really not sure. I'm sorry if they're alpacas. I apologize. It's what I found on the internet. What can I say? But my llama stands for just 4 things: learn, local action, monitor, and advocacy. So learn is like, I'm not trying to make anybody microman here. I will show you on the next slide like one thing. If you can download it and read it, it's about 8 pages and it has pictures. And it is super accessible. Every single person in this room, easy. You probably all know it anyways. But I tell this like when I talk to the Rotary Club. Yes, there's a level of scientific literacy. It's not a high bar, but just a little bit. You know the basics, and now you can be an informed citizen. That's all. Not trying to make people microman. Local action. What can you do within your lifestyle today? We can all do stuff. When I moved to Penn State 5 years ago, I had a choice for my project. I could either buy a house about 10 miles out, big house, big country, all that kind of stuff, and drive to and from work every day, pay Penn State parking. Or I could, for the same budget, buy a smaller, older house, but I walk to work, and that's what I did. And we took a little bit of the extra money and put it into insulation and windows and stuff like that. The other thing is I don't pay Penn State parking. Turns out, you cannot get your transcript from Penn State unless you pay all your undergraduate parking tickets. Just saying. So I don't want to pay them any more money for parking. I've already done that. Okay, but I digress. So that's local action. And monitor. Monitoring on the technical side, you can't go back in time and get observations. So the one thing I was most concerned with this administration is, would they stop the monitoring? And they tried. Congress didn't let them. All the satellites that NASA needs to monitor are in fact fully funded in this omnibus, and that's a very good thing. They can hide stuff on their web. Honestly, we get a new administration, we can go and unhide it. We'll find it again. That's not that big a deal. But if you stop the satellites, or if there's a gap in the data, you really can't pick it up, and it gets much, much harder for a whole variety of technical reasons to get different satellites when you don't have overlapping records. You know, if I get into the technical stuff, people's eyes will roll to the back of their head. But you really need a continuous record. And then A is advocacy. And anytime you get a chance, ask your elected congressperson, you know, ma'am, sir, what are you doing to stabilize the climate? That's what I ask. I don't ask them, are they for cap and trade? I don't ask them, do they support a carbon tax? I don't ask them, do they take the recycling out on Wednesday or whatever. I ask them, what are you doing to stabilize the climate? It's sort of like dating 101. It's not a yes or no question. You might get an interesting answer. You might not, but even if you don't, it registers in that politician brain, somewhere back in the brainstem there, that one of their constituents were interested. They know what their constituents are interested in. I was just talking this past Saturday to a Republican congressman on the Armed Services Committee, represents Northeast Wisconsin. He told me 10% of his district really cares about climate change, 10% hates it, and 80% doesn't care at all. So, you know, if he takes a vote, he's going to piss off about the same number of people he makes happy, and most don't care. That's where it is. So sometimes I'm asked, what can we do? And it's like I look at that picture of Nelson Mandela. Hold that mirror up. to your own face. We will change this. Congress will not lead, but they can be led. And they will be led. Okay, the book on the right, it's not even a book, it's 8 pages. What We Know, American Association for Advancement for Science, is right out on the web. If you type What We Know, AAAS, first link, it comes right up. And if you really want more, if you want to go from the 95th to the 99th percent level of literacy, climate change evidence and causes from the national academies. But honestly, you don't even need that. I shouldn't say that because I kind of work for the academies. But yeah, and they don't have as good a title as the other one too. I told them that. Okay, we're about to wrap up here. The energy, you know, I just have one slide. And I stole this from Richard Allen. And he talks about how we've already undergone 3 energy transitions in our country since our country was born. We were 100% wood, and then we were almost all coal for a while, and now we're mostly liquid fossil fuels. And we will get to renewables, or at least what I call non-carbon-based power. But the question is what do the slopes look like? How fast and how quickly do we do that? And government can either have policies that push those lines to the left, and we do it faster, or they can retard this, and we can take a long time to do it. And since we really need to reduce our carbon budget pretty quickly, I would like to see policies that push those lines to the left and sharpen those slopes. That's kind of the policy thing. It's going to happen, but how fast does it happen? And we need faster as well. Okay, so at the end of the day, this is really about risk management. Some people like that, and other people it's like, yeah, whatever. But this is risk management, and we are all going to live with this. We're not going to solve it, unfortunately. We're going to manage climate change, probably for the lifetime of everybody here, and most likely for the lifetime of your children as well, and your grandchildren. Oh, Penn State, that's interesting. That is Penn State. They probably won't be parking tickets. They heard about the parking tickets. Okay, let me just close with one, personal story here, and we'll see if this works. This is where I lived in Mississippi when I was running the Navy's weather and ocean prediction capabilities. 3 houses off the Gulf of Mexico. And, you know, modest house in a place called Waveland, Mississippi. And you ever wonder what a 9-meter storm surge does coming up your street? Let me show you. So this is me, the first time we got back to our house after Katrina. This is not after cleaning up the lot. So when we say we lost our house, we quite literally lost our house. It was like this. We don't know to this day whether it ended up in the railway tracks somewhere over there or in the Gulf of Mexico somewhere over there. If you look though, you see the brick stuff in the right? That was the ugliest house on the street. So my fantasy is my house came off its foundations, knocked down the ugly house, and that's okay. I'm all right. I show this not for sympathy in many ways that I don't have time to get into. My wife and I were some of the luckiest people on the Mississippi coast, maybe the luckiest people. But what I do show this for is think of the millions and millions of people who this will happen to just with rising sea level. You don't even have to assume hurricanes and typhoons get stronger or weaker. This is going to happen. And like Syria, if you don't provide for those people, people get desperate, and they will do desperate things to survive. And if that happens, it becomes big security issues in many, many parts of the world, in addition to a moral issue and a human rights issue and all those other things. But just from a hardcore security issue, it's there. So let me close with a quote here. This is Admiral Nimitz. I don't think he's really renowned as a tree hugger. But he was, arguably the admiral that won the war in the Western Pacific in World War II. Talks about nothing's more dangerous than for somebody to be grudging and taking precautions. I would say we see lots of flashing yellow and red lights ahead of us, and we're still not sure that we need to take any precautions. This gentleman here was alleged to have said, because it turns out Churchill never said anything, but he's alleged to have said that Americans can always be counted upon to do the right thing. Of course, after exhausting every other possibility. So we're still exhausting possibilities here. But what I'd really like to finish with is this picture, not of exhausting possibilities, but this is, many of you probably recognize, this was mission control of NASA in Apollo 13. So I was a teenager, young teenager when this happened. And as I got older, I read more and more about it. And as I read more and more about it, I realized that by all rights, those astronauts should have died in space. We should never have gotten them home We didn't let that happen. We went from having no idea this was an issue to boom, and we focused not just NASA, not just the federal government, but frankly the entire science and technology enterprise in the US instantly on solving this problem that nobody had even thought of before. If we can do that, when we get focused, we can certainly deal with an issue that we understand well and for which there are well-known solutions. We have to get focused, and we have to decide that we have the will to do that. Once we do that, we can really figure this stuff out. And with that, thank you very much, and I'll be happy to take any questions.